Hi there. Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. My name is Owen van Dongen and I will be the host for this webinar. I'm also the project manager on this project, and so I'm especially hopeful that you'll find the session interesting and useful. We're really excited to have had such a large response and such a large diverse audience from government, academia, industry, and private industry. So with people attending from South Africa, the US, UK, Europe, and beyond. It's a really great indication of the interest and the importance of the subject, and we're excited to share our experience in this project with you. Before we begin, I just want to start with some housekeeping. The session will be recorded, and the recording and the slide decks will be made available to everybody in the coming days, along with some additional detail of our project. We really look forward to your questions, so please post these in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to these at the dedicated time at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to every question, or if we're unable to answer anything specific, then we're happy to take these offline and engage with you further. We'll also be adding a Google form link in the chat box, so please look out for that, and you can use that to connect with our team after the webinar and post the webinar. Speaking of connections, load shedding, we have done our best to ensure that we've got all the right backups in place, but please bear with us if there's any issue. So with that out the way, I'm really pleased to introduce our main speakers today, Lauren Hermanus from How We Adapt and Anthony Dane from Change Pathways. Anthony is an economist with 15 years of experience in sustainability, focusing on climate change, energy, and development. He founded Change Pathways in 2015, aimed at trying to challenge some of these complex challenges. So he's worked with a wide range of clients, covering a broad spectrum of areas related to decarbonization and just transition. He supported a lot of clients in their response to ever-evolving climate change regulations and expectations around that. Equally accomplished is Lauren Hermanus, who's spent more than a decade in sustainable development research and practice. She leads a company called How We Adapt, which is a network-based platform to advance this type of work. She's also worked in private and public sectors, in academia, with NGOs, and with a large focus on sustainable energy transitions, resilience, and the green economic development. She's also initiated a project called Just Urban Transitions, and which aims to support the carbon transition across levels of organizations, from policy to planning to implementation. Her work has revolved a large amount in Mpumalanga, and she really is one of the highly respected voices in this complex landscape. So between them, they really bring a deep understanding of this complex environment and an empathy in the solutions that need to be created. And they've built a lot of strong relationships and connections, which we found so important to drive meaningful and appropriate conversations in this space. And we hope that today's session will be the start of a similar engagement with a broader set of stakeholders. And so thank you very much for your time and your attendance. Lauren, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can take it from there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Owen, for those kind words of introduction. And thank you to everyone who's joined. So what if we could repurpose the coal mining site into a vibrant hub of viable, sustainable businesses, employment creation, additional income creation, infrastructure provision, and additional local livelihood support. Excuse me, there's a bit of a technical hiccup on our side. This is obviously a question on many different stakeholders' minds at this moment in our history. What we want to reflect on in this webinar is this possibility. Together, we're going to consider a single exploratory example of relevant economic intervention, which is our ongoing pilot initiative, which you'll hear a lot more about. Using this example, We will sketch one potential pathway, we believe, towards a sustainable and equitable economic afterlife for a mine, repurposing this site and these sites in a way that contributes to economic diversification and ultimately supports a just transition for South Africa and for Mpumalanga in particular. All of this obviously sounds really great, and in reality, we cannot predict exactly what is possible or how it will be possible. What we do know is that the time is now to figure it out. And we, this project team, about whom you'll hear a little bit more as we move on, want to be a part of the community of actors thinking about this challenge across government, civil society, and the private sector, including large and small businesses. So, great. So, we think of this project as an implementation lab, a site of active learning by doing, generating lessons for our own work, of course, but also for other actors in this space. In this session, we will share with you our understanding of the context and the opportunity as we see it, as well as then moving on to our particular approach, responding to that context. We will also talk about where we fit into the big picture of Mpumalanga province's economic diversification. From that point, we will move on to share information about who we are and the practical steps that we have taken, as well as the concrete economic diversification insights that we've gleaned from our process so far. Finally, we will provide an indication of our next steps and what we believe will enable those steps. There'll definitely be time for questions and comments, as Owen has said. We are really pleased to be at this point in our work, where we can begin to engage in earnest and also widely. We know that we don't have all the answers in this area, and we're very excited to think with you and with others as we forge ahead. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Anthony Dane.
Great, thanks, Lauren. And thanks, everyone. It's great to have you here. So what I want to do is I want to start with something that we're working on right now. And it's something we're quite excited about. We actually transferred the CapEx for for a hydroponics pilot yesterday. So it's something real. And effectively what we're looking to do, what we are doing, is putting in place an underground hydroponics farm. As far as we can tell, it's the first of its kind in Africa, and we're expecting our first harvest in May. So yeah, it's something real. And I think the reason I'm bringing it up is because it's a concrete example of something that's coming out of our learning lab. We don't know at this point if it's going to be viable, but I mean, the economics so far are looking good. And it just gives you an example of something that we're trying to do, and hopefully demonstrates a little bit of who we are, how we are going about doing this work, and just places the rest of the webinar within the context of something real. So with that, this is for Zando South. This is our site. It's an underground coal mine. It's currently active. It's relatively small, produces about 2 million tons of coal a year. It's modern, so board and pillar, it's a board and pillar mine. So that means there's quite a lot of space. If you look at this photo, as far as the eye can see, about 70 meters below is a network of underground tunnels. So it's quite vast if one thinks about an underground hydroponics plant. So where is it? It's in the Msukeligwa local municipality in Gaertsebande, which is about 20 kilometers from Bethel, 75 from Middelburg, 40 kilometers from the Kendal Power Station, which many of you'll know is exploring its own just transition project. So besides the fact that we are implementing something in the heart of where we're needing to contribute towards, or trying to contribute towards, tackling the just energy transition, there are other reasons why we chose this site. So I mean, the starting point is that we've got some level of operational control. And actually, this gives you some insight into how we're going about our work. So we've got some level of operational control, and that's because Blue Mining are the are mining this site. They're a contract coal mining company, and I'll introduce you to Greg, the CEO, a little bit later. So that gives us a space in which we can actually test things in a concrete way, which allows us to explore what can work there, but at the same time, understand what can work in the broader mining context. So if it doesn't work here, at least we're getting the kind of evidence and information that we can then use to inform, putting this into the broader context. So what are we doing? What's the pilot going to look like? We've partnered up with Future Farms, which we're very excited about. They've got an excellent track record. That bottom right corner is an example of one of the farms that they've put up. So we're going to have something similar. It's going to be a fully equipped, specially designed indoor hydroponics farm within tunnels, in the kind of space that you're seeing in that top picture. So yeah, it certainly is new and different. Initially, it's going to be about 31 meters by 5 meters, producing around 1.2 tons of spinach, basil, and lettuce. We're going to run it for 6 months, and we think that's going to be, that's the sort of thing that's going to give us enough time to sort of test our various assumptions. We've got initial offtake lined up. It's owned by a local beneficiary, which was a requirement of our SCD grant funding that we secured. And importantly, we've been able to address the various health and safety and environmental and other regulatory requirements. So we're moving ahead with construction. As I say, we're expecting to produce in May. So I think the thing that excites us about this and gives you a sense of what we're looking at is the economics look promising. But obviously there are challenges. So underground, it's more complex. There are additional regulatory hurdles. CapEx is a bit higher, but at least from a technical perspective, we've found none of this is insurmountable. And so it allows us to also explore to what extent we can reap the benefits. So for example, the temperature underground is consistent throughout the year, 17, 18 degrees, which is ideal for growing saffron, which we're exploring. We've got good security, which could be good for cannabis. We've got no competition for land, which is often obviously an issue. We've got water, although this is highly water efficient. We don't have pests. So it really gives us a space to potentially produce low carbon, climate resilient food, as well as products in the bioeconomy. So cannabis, sustainable biofuel, biomass, and these are things that we're exploring. So it's a pilot initiative, part of our pilot project. It's letting us explore tangible business models and generate knowledge and insights. And so it lets us explore this particular economic diversification option, but also generates lessons for hydroponics on surface and more broadly. It allows us to walk a journey with potential partners, build relationships, and understand potential sustainable food off-takers, understand the job potential, and really importantly, allow us to investigate models for shared ownership. So important to just say what we are not is hydroponics or an underground farming project. This is merely something that lets us test something real, innovate, and learn on our journey, which is fundamental to our approach to exploring an appropriate model within this context. And I'm going to hand over to Lauren to speak to exactly that.
Great, thanks very much, Anthony. So zooming out and considering the context in which this very specific initiative is being rolled out, let's think about Mpumalanga. The province has several significant sectors. Manufacturing is 12% of provincial GDP, construction is at 3%, agriculture is at 3%, and of course mining is very significant. We'll get into that. Although agriculture is only 3% of provincial GDP, the province is a bit of a breadbasket, and it produces 44% of South Africa's soybeans, 22% of the country's citrus, 67% of the country's bananas, and 4% of cattle. It also has a sizable poultry industry. So just to say that GDP only gives us some of the economic story, it doesn't tell us the whole story about the province's productivity, its significance to our broader economy, and the potential for value addition. So obviously, mining is very significant to Mpumalanga's economy. I think that goes without saying at this point. However, at 22% of provincial GDP, we also have to remember that mining plays a significant part in South Africa's broader national economy at between 8 and 9% of national GDP as well. Of course, the sector has critical intersections with other sectors, including energy and manufacturing. 80% of coal mining activities are concentrated in just 2 districts in Mpumalanga, and that is Khatsibande, where we are, as well as in Kangala. In terms of downstream activities, electricity generation and petrochemical production, these are also concentrated in the province. And as such, the majority of job losses, as well as economic value add associated with the move away from fossil fuels, are going to be felt in these 2 districts in the broader province. That is not to say, however, that there isn't going to be a knock-on effect that reaches into the rest of the country. Of course, Mpumalanga is a labor receiving region, and that means that people are migrating in from other parts of the country still, even in the context of transition, in search of economic opportunity. So, fully cognizant of the cost and complexity of the challenge at hand, as operational coal mines move towards closure, we see, and I think several other stakeholders also see, that their rehabilitation and repurposing presents various opportunities to leverage infrastructure, funding, relationships to support new and different economic activities related to the province's existing strengths. There are many assets that support Mpumalanga's economic diversification, and this includes its geographical location, its proximity to Gauteng, and its proximity to, or its position along export routes rather, infrastructure, natural capital, as well as its people, a population of more than 4.5 million residents, of which 92% are under the age of 60. Many people are focused on understanding and responding to this context and to the opportunities it presents. And as part of our early planning, we've engaged with the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency, which is headed by Nkosinathi Mkhonyane, to better understand the local ambition in this regard. Nkosinathi Mkhonyane is a development economist with vast experience in both public and private sectors, focusing on economic research and policy development. He has served as a member of various intergovernmental structures for policymaking in South Africa across different sectors of the economy. And at the Green Cluster, he works at the intersection of business, government, and academia, which is so critical to identify and remove barriers to an economically viable green economy. So, Nazi, I'd like to invite you now to join us in this conversation, and I would love to hear your response to some of the following questions. So firstly, how do you at the Green Cluster frame the challenge of coal mine closure? Do you see associated economic opportunities, and who do you believe should be involved in responding to those opportunities at mining sites?
Okay, thanks, Lauren. I'm not quite sure if I'm audible enough because where I am right now, we're sitting under load shedding. My apologies for that if I'm not audible enough because of the bandwidth challenge. However, thanks for the kind introduction, Lauren. Yes, we are in Mpumalanga. And actually the statistics were shared, and I thought that is where I will start. But I think Lauren has made my job easier by sharing the statistics. But just to say that mining is, this very topic is a very difficult topic today in Mpumalanga. Difficult in the sense that if you talk mine closures, communities are not excited about that, and precisely because all we know, especially in the Highveld region, in terms of economic activity, relates to mining. So there are many other sectors that are connected to the mining sector in the Highveld region. So it is, of course, a very difficult conversation to have when we talk the issue of mine closures in the province of Mpumalanga. However, the reality is that many of these mines, we've seen a lot of mining closing down because of different reasons. I mean, we all know that the country has decided to undertake a path which is the path of low carbon economy. What then becomes important to note in this regard is that we have seen quite a number of mine closing. We have interacted with a number of mines in the province of Mpumalanga that are closing down. Some of them, of course, have certain challenges. But what we have seen lately is that all the mines, especially in the coal sector, because mining in Mpumalanga, mines is not only coal mining that is taking place. Of course, coal would be the main commodity. We are responsible for 83% of South Africa's coal in the province of Mpumalanga. And if I were to talk about the coal reserves, in Mpumalanga, we still have about 70 to 80 years of coal underground. So meaning we have a lot of coal in the province of Mpumalanga, which also explain why 11 of the coal-powered fire stations are located in the province of Mpumalanga. Now, in terms of mines, I've already said that coal is not the only commodity. Of course, we have chrome, we have chrome and ore mining. We also have gold that is being mined, though it may not be at the equivalent of coal. But however, what is important to note is that some of the other commodities have experienced difficulty. At this present moment, the coal miners are laughing all the way to the bank because coal is selling like nobody's business, and coal has never been so profitable like the current, in current times. And we know that is influenced by other factors that are taking place, or other events that are taking place in other parts of the globe. We all know that there is now a demand for coal almost in many countries across Europe and other countries due to the current situation, of course. Which increases that Mpumalanga. When you talk about mine closures, it is of course a threat. People in this province will look into that as a threat to jobs. A lot of people would argue that we will lose a lot of jobs as a result of this. And we have seen that. We have seen quite a number of companies that have closed down, shedding jobs. Of course, it is a challenge. But we also see that from the perspective of the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency, we also see that as providing other opportunities. And we have quite seen a number of mines in the province now engaging in practices where they are trying to mine sustainably, and also to link mining with other activities, which is talking to the issue of your economic diversification. We have seen a lot of mines doing that, and we are engaging with a number of those mines that are doing that in the province of Mpumalanga. So as much as we believe that there are jobs that are being shed as a result of mine closures, but we also see opportunities. There are opportunities, there are things that can be done, and we are drawing lessons from other parts of the globe. There are other things, of course, that are taking place, that are being done, and we, from the Green Cluster Agency itself, we have undertaken a number of study tours where we have seen what other people. And we believe there are quite a number of things, and we are already developing plans in the province that are looking into this aspect. One of those plans would talk, for instance, like would relate to the thinking in the province. The thinking is that maybe we should move towards looking at repurposing some of the closed mines, and repurposing some of these closed mines would talk to different things that can be done, not only things that relates to the energy space, but we're also looking at things that, just like what was presented now, which focuses into agriculture. By the way, there are 4 areas that we find to be key in the province, or other sectors that we are promoting as the Mpumalanga Grain Cluster Agency. One of those sectors, of course, is your climate smart agriculture. We believe that is very, very critical. We are also looking into the whole issue of water. We are a water scarce province, water scarce country, and there's a lot of water that is coming, which is underground water that comes from the mining activity. And we believe that that water can be cleaned up, it can be reticulated, and it can be used for other mining, or rather for agricultural purposes. But over and above that, we're looking at the whole issue of your circular economy, and we are looking at the land within mines, maybe rehabilitating the mined land, and that land could be used for agricultural purposes. That is also very, very important. We have seen some pilots. There are a few pilots that are being conducted by some of our partners, where land has been rehabilitated, and there are some agricultural activities that are taking place on that land. And what we have seen from those pilots is that there's good yield that is coming from that. I mean, you use mine water, clean mine water, you reticulate it for your agricultural purposes, and you are using the land that was mined, you restore the nutrients, you restore everything that was degraded. And we see from those pilots that you get a very good yield. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, but we're looking at eco parks, we're looking at museums, quite a lot of work that we're doing in the province to look at what can be done to repurpose these mines. So in the nutshell, I will end there. That is the thinking from the perspective of the province of Mpumalanga. And we hope that we could diversify the economy of the province, and we believe there is life after mine closure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So moving from the context to our specific initiative, the first thing I'd like to say is that nothing we are doing is to the exclusion of any other economic diversification project anywhere in the province. In fact, we are of a mindset that says more is more, and we think that our greatest chance of success and of achieving our ultimate aim is if there are many different actors pursuing many different projects towards the same end of economic diversification. So we believe that a range of interventions is required. We think these interventions should be implemented from the industrial policy scale down to industrial ecosystems, whether these be parks or special zones, large, small, and medium businesses, micro enterprises, community-led livelihoods cultivation, and more. We believe that these should be public-led, private-led, civil society, and community-led, and that all these different kinds of initiatives are going to be needed with various kinds of interconnection and cooperation between them and between the actors that are driving them. So as we've stated already, our ultimate aim is certainly to support the diversification of Mpumalanga's broader economy, and also then to support our national ambitions of a just transition, as well as the country's net zero commitments as well. So we are working on just one specific example of what we see as an essential diversity of interventions. As I've mentioned, our initiative is working towards a commercial enterprise which operates at the meso scale, so below the industrial scale, above the scale of perhaps a small or micro enterprise. Scalability, so this is the potential to grow our initiative larger as well as to replicate this initiative is a significant criterion for us in assessing different business opportunities. We see our small project, our initial small project, as having the potential to act as an attractor for additional complementary investments as it grows, and these investments could be undertaken by the eventual team that runs with that initiative, or it could also be undertaken by other actors as well. So we're currently in the pre-feasibility phase of our work, as Anthony mentioned. We do not yet have a range of concrete site-specific economic opportunities with which to initiate local engagement. So that would be engagements that are with stakeholders who are tied to a specific site. We are going to dive into the specifics of the site where we happen to be working at the moment, and I'll leave that to my colleague Anthony to do. But just to say that as we move forward with what is really an emergent and exploratory process of learning by doing, and you'll notice we keep saying this, and certainly our hydroponics initiative is an example of a doing that we hope to learn from, even if it isn't ultimately what we move forward with. We are guided really by a commitment to a set of values. And so these values are about obviously pursuing just outcomes, understanding the complexity of that term and the contestation about the nature and extent of justice in this process of transition. We commit to do no harm. Of course, this is a difficult commitment to sustain without engagement and collaboration, engagement and sharing, which creates feedback loops for us about our various actions and interactions, is critical to the way that we are already working and will work going forward. Then accountability, of course, for our interactions, as well as then supporting through the various business models that we are pursuing a commitment to net zero. So those are our high-level values. We're also guided by a set of principles that guide our more practical actions. And these are, firstly, that we work in an incremental way. We think that if you work in a complex system, it's impossible to predict how any project will play out to a complete extent. And so what this means is that you need to take small enough steps so that should those prove to be the wrong steps or in need of some kind of adaptation or adjustment, that is possible, that you haven't sunk in too much time, effort, resource to adjust. We also have a commitment to thinking about the kinds of business models that are possible within the opportunities that we're exploring. So we're thinking about shared profits, shared ownership, shared benefit structures, and this is really core to what we're doing. We also want to work in a concrete way with tangible outputs. We think there's a lot of really important research that is happening related to the transition. Certainly, Anthony and I are both involved in much of that research, but we also think that in parallel to that research, that concrete interventions of various kinds, which are also underway, need to happen, need to be advanced. And so this project sort of spans both of those spaces of a kind of a learning space as well as working towards concrete outputs. Sorry, I just want to go back one. Sorry about that. So really the points here is that although we don't have our concrete business model or that menu of opportunities which we can go ahead and sort of implement at this stage, what we do already have is an emergent process model. So there's a process that we've undertaken, and this process of exploring, defining, and starting to test different business models can in fact already be taken and moved by us or by other stakeholders to be implemented at different sites to generate a similar menu of economic possibilities that are specific to that site or to that kind of site. Great. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Anthony.
Thanks, Lauren. So I just wanted to add, one of the things in kind of getting, when we were exploring this together, and I was, chatting to Lauren about it, was, we have been, as she said, involved in that kind of research space. And I think quite a big frustration among many was, the need to actually get implementing, to get something concrete happening on the ground, to learn by doing. And that was a big driver for us. And so I think what we hope to bring to the space is, a number of different things, but a concrete opportunity being one of those. And the other being an invested and capable team. And so I want to introduce you to another part of the team. So we've kind of brought together the kind of the decarbonization, climate change, just transition people, and we've partnered up with a team that's in the value chain, coal value chain, operating on the ground. And so you'll see on the screen here, we've got Gregory Dane, who is, I think, going to be sharing a screen. Can we see Greg? I can't see at this stage. Sharing his video. Thank you. Hi, Greg. So yeah, all right. So Greg is the CEO of Blue Mining Services. They're our partner. You might recognize the surname. You probably wouldn't see a resemblance, but we're actually brothers. So we do look a bit different, and we are a bit different. I've spent most of my life, of my career, working on climate change, and Greg has spent a fair part of his career in the coal industry. But yeah, so you can imagine we've had some interesting sort of family conversations over the years. But it's really around the just transition that we're coming together. And I think, we obviously come at it from somewhat different angles, but I think what we share is it's a challenge that we're both invested in, and we both see opportunities. And I think we both saw a unique opportunity to kind of come together with what we think is as I said, a capable and invested team with the necessary trust and mutual respect and complementary strengths to collectively design something that can contribute to this challenge. So a little bit about Greg. Greg is, as I said, the CEO of Blue Mining Services, underground and open cast mining company based in Middelburg and Mpumalanga, which principally mines coal. He's an entrepreneur, also a partner in a private equity business that has experience in mining, energy, and agriculture in the region. So really, I think he leads the team that brings access to the land, some of the stakeholders, markets, and a real ability to drive implementation on the ground. So Greg, it's great to have you part of our team. It's great to have come together around this opportunity. It's actually, you are in the genesis of it. You came to me and said, look, we've got to explore things in this space. So I wanted to bring you in to maybe just tell us a little bit more about you, what you do, particularly the realities that you're facing on the ground as a coal miner in this space, and then importantly, what it is that has brought you to get involved in this Just Transition project.
Afternoon, Anthony and team, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. Firstly, I have to say, seldom does a sibling or is a sibling complimentary, but thank you for that introduction. And yes, we have had some interesting discussions over family lunches, etc. Yes, I'm from a private equity business, and the reason why we looked at buying into a mining services business is, from a macro perspective, there were a lot of the big mining companies that were either pulling out of South Africa and the region, or deciding to go the contracting route. And we felt that there was a fair amount of scope within the space to be able to provide a full turnkey service to clients. And that's end to end. We look after, community liaison, training, safety, obviously the production of safe commodities, principally, as Anthony has mentioned, coal, but obviously we've got diversification strategies ourselves because of the environment that we are facing. We employ in the region of about 2,000 people across the group, so not insignificant. And, as we all know, those 2,000 people probably support another 8 to 10 each. So it's a fair number of people that are, part of our system. And, I think that is one of the reasons why I approached Anthony, because it's really important from a governance perspective that we look at sustainability of our business. And one is diversification across commodities, but the other is, how do we deal with the economic sustainability of our people who work for us? And, this leads into some of the other challenges that we've been having within the space. And, in a way, it's good. We all know that the world is in a precarious situation. Climate change is a reality. I'm not going to be a coal miner who says otherwise. The reality is there needs to be a just transition. There is still a requirement of coal within the South African space. We need to look at producing that in best in class, and we need to look at these just transition strategies amongst the best in class so that we can all work to ultimate just transition outcome. So some information is that we really have been struggling to raise funding, and many of you will think, well, that is a good thing. And I'm not disputing that capital moves the way people go about making decisions, etc. But again, it doesn't talk to the just transition. We've got 2,000 people. We've got a very big social requirements in this country that we need to look after. I myself am fully invested in the country, invested in the business. There's a lot of money that's been put in. I'm invested in the people. And, everyone, obviously there's the big focus on the environmental side, but not looking at the social and how we just transition properly is really important. So we have had a lot of challenges in the funding space. We have had to look at our business differently. We have had to bring in expertise to help us with the likes of our ESG documentation. It's one of the reasons why we really wanted to get involved in this project, but it's not just to tick a box. This is really important for us. We've got skilled people who are living in a province where effectively, in a number of years down the line, these jobs are not necessarily going to be as they currently are. So, that's really where we're placed. And, we're actively looking for ways to fund the existing projects that we have. Insurance is also a challenge because of what we do. Banks are all saying, look, if you mine battery minerals, etc., you can have all the funding you need. And it is all fine, but it doesn't lend itself to a just transition. So it's why we are really wanting to be part of this pathway. And it's just one practical example that we're working on. But as I said to my brother early on, we have to start showing practical examples of how we can go about these things. So that's, really from my side. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, and I think hopefully it gives you a sense of, who we are and how we're going about this. And as long as, we're very much in that kind of exploratory phase, but towards, doing something real. So Greg, thanks so much. And we're looking forward to, continuing this with you and your team. It's been great. All right, I'm going to move us along. All right, so what I want to do is just give you a sense of our journey, what we've done, where we're at the moment, and where we're looking to go. So really, the team came together, as I mentioned, and around this particular challenge. We then started exploring opportunities, developed a concept based on this, obviously, this concrete opportunity, and this kind of, I guess, hypothesis around a capable and invested team. And so, with that, we were really fortunate to secure some pre-feasibility funding, really to say, look, we need the space to be able to explore. We obviously want to drive something real, but we need to do it true to, the principles of a just transition and the conceptual approach and process model that Lauren laid out. And so key for us is being able to pilot and learn. And so we've organized ourselves around a set of work streams, and I think it's useful just to give you a sense of how we've gone about it. But Also, we can drill into some of the outcomes that are starting to come up. And just to reiterate at this point, we are going to share the information as well as broader, more detail than is currently in the slides. So we're going to give you some sense of what we're finding, but we will share more afterwards and welcome any follow-up engagements. So the work streams that we've been sort of using to organize ourselves, obviously the primary is economic diversification. And we started with what is the option space? What are the various options that we can explore and look to kind of narrow those down? And I will share in a bit more detail economic diversification on the next slide. The second was site selection, because we identified, and with the support from Blue Mining, about 15 different sites where we had interest that ranged from sort of high-level interest to really strong interest in kind of exploring collectively just transition projects. So part of our work was then to say, well, how are we gonna decide which site we focus on initially? And we battled a little bit with that, and we were exploring the economic diversification options in parallel with site selection and saying, look, what are the options that are looking good, from an economics perspective, which have got decent kind of business models business cases that we can see, which sites are those suited to, and then can we kind of come up with a set of criteria for choosing sites and a set of criteria for choosing economic diversification. And we were going in circles. So we decided, look, let's focus on an area where we can really engage, test things, and that's for Zando South, where we have this operational control, as I mentioned, but generate learnings and capture that, those learnings so that we can apply it into the broader context. So another example there is we had an initial economic diversification option, or a technology at least, that we were interested in, which was, can we treat mine-affected water and pull out some of those impurities and produce fertilizers and chemicals? And so we engaged with a technology provider, and then we went to the Zando South site to get a number of samples, water samples. And we found the quality was, at least for this technology, a little bit too high. There weren't enough impurities to support a sustainable business case. But it was useful because we then were able to better understand, well, what are the levels, the thresholds, what are the conditions that would make this work? And we can obviously explore that as we look, hopefully, to scale up and scale out, once we've achieved some success with our pilot. So that's something that's still very much ongoing. Stakeholder engagement at this initial stage has been more around research to inform our work across the various work streams, but also to inform the development of some sort of stakeholder engagement plan as we move forward, and that component becomes that much more important. Business models. So again, linking back to what Lauren highlighted around one of our principles is to share profits and benefits. We have been exploring the option space with respect to different kind of ownership models that could deliver on that principle. And then finally, funding. So funding, both to further our pre-feasibility work, which we still need to do, to then find funding for the feasibility phase, the pilot implementation, and ultimately as we look to sort of scale up and scale out at a more programmatic level. And so we've been investigating what sort of options are available, what requirements come with that. So to drill into the economic diversification, and I think, again, just to give you a sense of what we're finding and what we're starting to focus on. So we have developed a number of focus areas, and these include net zero markets, sustainable food, and the bioeconomy. And firstly, why we've done this is because we see market opportunities. Part of our hypothesis here is that there is an opportunity for the private sector to play a role, only a role within the space, and we're not seeing a lot of players in that space. We're hoping to bring something additional there. And obviously, if you're going to incentivize the private sector to play a role, we need to ensure that there is a business case, a viable business model from which to maximize the positive just transition outcomes like shared ownership and jobs, etc. So for us, the starting point is we want to find a viable business model with strong business cases. The other is that we were looking for synergies and efficiencies across this. So part of this is that we're focusing around trying to work out where do we build our capabilities, where do we invest, not only in ourselves, but also in, in relationships. And so I think across these three, there's some commonalities in terms of the kinds of stakeholders that would be involved, in terms of the kinds of funders, technology providers. Of course, some of the economic diversification options we've cut across these different areas, but at least it gives us some focus so that we can avoid diluting ourselves too much. And so within these areas, there are some initial findings that are quite exciting. So on the net zero market slide, we are seeing increasing demand for low carbon or new products as we transition to the 1.5 degree world. We're seeing these markets growing globally. And although they're small still in the sort of South African context, we do think that they're under prioritized, that there is more potential there. So particularly in areas like high value nature-based offsets like biochar, possibly some green industrial products. On the sustainable food side, for us, really, this is the next frontier, from a climate perspective, in the sense that a third of global greenhouse gas emissions come from food value chains. And it's also an area with some of the greatest potential to decarbonize. Some of the best mitigation opportunities sit in this value chain. And at the same time, obviously, it's an area that's very exposed to physical climate impacts. So for us, we believe that the demand for low carbon, climate resilient food, while clearly it is growing, we also think it's bigger than what a lot of the market is currently pricing. And we do see an opportunity in that space. So examples are hydroponics, of which we're obviously exploring, regenerative agriculture, protein alternatives, etc. On the bioeconomy side, again, and this cuts across, but there's a growing emphasis on sort of nature-based solutions, but also some of these harder to abate sectors. So, one of the examples that we've been exploring is around biofuel. And part of it is that if we look at the companies in that area, mining companies, for example, they are exploring decarbonization pathways. How do they deliver on their long-term net zero commitments? What do they do in the short and the medium term? And they're investing in energy efficiency, electric vehicles, electrification, but it's heavy transports, among others, that represents a challenge. It's harder to decarbonize. And down the line, we might have battery electric, fuel cell electric, green hydrogen-based internal combustion engines. But in the shorter term, there aren't many options. And biofuel presents a potential option. But the sustainability of that biofuel and something that doesn't compete with food production is obviously a challenge. But it's in this space that we can potentially contribute to that. And we're seeing from our work a lot that we think is really promising. It's also quite encouraging from an economics perspective. The business case is looking good. And we think that the concerns around scale are perhaps less than what we believe a lot of people actually think at this stage. And again, we've got other examples, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to dig into those. But I think one of the key points to just highlight is we're not finding a single economic diversification option that on its own is likely to be good enough. And so practically, we're seeing that we're needing to bundle and we're needing to invest in enablers. So that's really informing how we're organizing ourselves within this framework. So we're seeing anchor projects where we've got a strong business case and we see them as potentially being scalable, supported by other projects where there are viable business cases, but potentially limited in scale. And then in addition to that, we recognize that there may be certain projects or initiatives or interventions or whatever it might be that on their own are not viable. They don't generate the sort of revenue, but they may be necessary to enable us to move forward. And so in that space, one example is quick benefits. For example, if we explore regenerative agriculture, some of the returns come further down the line, and we've got to bridge that. We've got certain stakeholder conditions, requirements that we may need to meet in order to be able to drive these projects forward. If we're looking at biomass recycling, we may need some sort of model where we aggregate from various suppliers. What sort of support is required, capacity. And so within the structure, we've started to identify these different areas. And really, we're now in a position where we're consolidating that and saying, all right, we've got clarity on where we move going forward. And this is the intention. So we've been enabled by donor funding and support from Blue Mining. We, going forward, need to continue the pre-feasibility work. So additional exploration, we need to further reduce the options and firm up the plan so that we can move forward with our feasibility, which we're sort of anticipating from during the course of next year. Obviously, much more detailed engagement with stakeholders, refining our models, selecting sites, formalizing partnerships, securing additional funding so that we can ultimately implement still a pilot, but at that point, a commercial scale pilot, something that we're expecting to be commercially viable, but nonetheless, still something that has learning by doing as fundamental, so that ultimately we can contribute towards a model that we can scale up and out over time. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Lauren.
Great. Thank you very much. So I think at this stage, we're going to move on to addressing some of the questions that are in the chat. Owen, I know you've had your eye on the chat as well, but perhaps I can start by responding to some of the questions that I've already seen. Is that right?
Yes, please do.
Okay, fabulous. So this is, now that we've shared, we've done a bit of a big download of information, and we realized that in an hour, we can only share so much information with you. So we're going to see this as the beginning of a conversation. Then I do want to thank everybody so far who has shared questions and comments with us in the chat for doing so. And also just a reminder that we'll try to answer as many as possible. And again, the beginning of a conversation. So the first thing I want to address is this idea of community engagements. And from our perspective, it's about thinking about who are the local stakeholders. So stakeholders that are locally defined, that have a relationship to the site where a commercial venture will be implemented. So one of the things to bear in mind is that we don't have a site for our commercial venture. We are cooperating with Blue Mining at this particular site at the moment, just to think about what kinds of viable businesses are possible in that context and in that kind of context. And so it is premature for us to start raising expectations, really, with very little to offer any kind of local stakeholders. And we would see that as extractive and also, cruel, really, given the context of change that is coming to the region. And so absolutely, at the point where we have not a fully defined project, but before we get there, once we have a menu of possibilities and we know where they could be implemented, we would engage decisively. We would bring in the necessary skills for that. This team, we are not, Anthony and I certainly are not community development specialists. We also are very aware of the organizations that have long histories of community engagement in the area and do have working relationships through this project, through other projects with those organizations rather. So it's on our radar. It absolutely is. It was a decision, an ethical and a strategic decision, not to go around engaging with people, extracting information, and raising expectations. So we know that that's not a perfect decision, but this is not a perfect context. We're also very cognizant of the risk of not failing at other people's expense. We're very much, when we say learning lab, I know that conjures up sort of design thinking sort of styles of approaches, but that's not this. So we are learning at the moment with other kinds of stakeholders, and we will continue that co-creation and co-learning as we move forward with the project. Then in terms of the question around jobs, so okay, I've done a lot of thinking around these questions to do with jobs in the transition and in just transitions. So the first thing to say is that this idea of you take out one business and you put in another business and you replace the jobs one for one the same quality, the same quantity, the same duration, all of that stuff, that is a myth. Okay, so anyone who is selling you that as a solution, I think is at best selling a very hopeful story, at worst selling a deliberately misleading story. What we know is that there is going to be significant job loss in the transition, right? If that transition is to be just, we have got to do everything we can to promote a diverse range of employment and income generation. So I'm saying both, right? It's not just about jobs, and jobs are not enough for this transition to be just. It's also about looking at other forms of income, and it's also about thinking about ownership as well. And these are things that we're going to be thinking about as we develop our business models further. So in terms of employment, however, again, just to stress, so looking at some of the comments that came through and the questions that came through, this project is not part of a coherent program of job creation, right? So this project is not going to solve the problem of job creation. It's one particular project that is going to produce one commercial model. It may have some kind of a knock-on effect. We don't know. We hope that certainly. And we will aim to maximize employment creation. We will aim to think about employment and ownership and equity as well. When we get to the stage where we have got business models that are kind of ready to move beyond pre-feasibility to actual feasibility, and local stakeholders are engaged, we are also really respectful of the rights of local stakeholders to say, we don't want any of your business models, right? So this is what it means to work responsibly in such a complex environment. So absolutely, when you think about, I mean, some of the potential business models that could replace mining, I mean, something to really bear in mind is that with mining jobs, okay, so over the last decade, we've had an overall increase in employment in coal value chains. So this was despite all kinds of volatility and movements. However, the increasing jobs are not the jobs that have security, that have pension benefits. No, it's casual labor that's increasing. And so these are all the kind of complex employment dynamics that we need to think about when we plan for employment. Again, although we are thinking about from the policy level down to this level of work, we're not aiming to drive a policy development through this project or implement a national policy of job creation through this project. That's not what this project is about. But it is, of course, happening in the context of not just job losses, but already high levels of unemployment in Mpumalanga and across the country. And it is across the country that is also driving migration into the province, which is still seen as a site of economic opportunity and employment opportunities. And so these are all the kind of contextual factors that certainly are informing our work, but we're not snake oil salesmen, and we're not trying to promise a solution that we know we can't deliver. I mean, something to really bear in mind about other transitioning regions around the world is that people who lost their jobs in coal mining sectors typically are not re-employed in those value chains. So this is in new value chains in that area. So what we're trying to do in South Africa is it's an extremely complex and challenging feat that lies ahead of us. It's not a reason to back away from it, but it is something that we need to bear in mind. And I think that it's sometimes not put on the table so bluntly because it's difficult. Yeah, it's challenging and it's very demanding. It requires, I think, a huge amount of honesty and bravery and ultimately collaboration, working together with sometimes some unlikely friends.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to add to that, Lauren, I mean, thank you. And there's an additional comment. It's quite specific from an anonymous attendee who says, part of it at least is who will be working in the pilot? Is it retrenched coal miners or new employees? So just to speak to that specifically, I just want to distinguish between, so we've got this hydroponics pilot, which is a pilot initiative. And we're wanting to distinguish it because we still want to implement the pilot project, which is larger scale. So at the moment, we're piloting different things, and then we're going to implement a pilot project. And then ultimately, hopefully a model that we can roll out. So I think there's a distinction, and at this point in time, we're looking to, it's a working coal mine. So they'll be operating within the production space or adjacent to. And we're working with community members that that the mine currently has a relationship with. And going forward, we still have to engage. We still have to work out how we would think about employment and jobs for the bigger pilot and ultimately rolling out more broadly. Oh, and should we? Yeah, I see. There's a range of questions. How do you want us to play it?
Yeah, I think first of all, I mean, thanks for all the questions. It's really important to engage on it, and I see there's a lot of interest and excitement and questions around the underground hydroponics, which I think is helpful, and that's why we're so excited also about having a project on the ground, because it means we can test a whole bunch of these questions which are coming in. So thank you very much for posting them. I'm going to try and group some of them together because I think the theme is fairly similar on some of them, and then I might have to go through and answer specifically. But I think sort of the first three, if we can group those together, and I don't know if you want to respond to them or if you want me to jump in anyway, but the first three at least is why the additional complexity of going underground? Is there not a need for other solutions which are low cost and easier to replicate? Would the energy requirements of that not be so much greater? And then we can go into sort of what sort of methodologies are we doing to assess our results over these next 6 months.
Yeah, and happy to speak to that. There is another question later on from James around some of the economics as well. And in relation to, I think it was regenerative agriculture. So how does it compare cost-wise with open field regenerative farming? So I think, I mean, one of the starting points is we're not sure that it definitely makes sense to be underground or not. But I was personally quite surprised when we started looking at the numbers, when we started working with future farms and exploring this. It was also really interesting when we went as a team to the site. We went underground to see the space, to see, that it is really an opportunity. So I think it's kind of probably there's two parts to this. On the one hand, there's pros and cons. And I guess we're wanting to explore the weighting, to what extent are the pros at play, to what extent are the cons at play. And then, the other is sort of, I guess kind of, testing hydroponics generally, because a lot of the lessons that we can get underground also help us understand, what hydroponics might look like on surface. So I think for us, underground, the benefit, so I mean, obviously there's higher energy costs with respect to lighting, but we do have lower energy costs with respect to temperature management. So it depends on what crops you're producing. So something like saffron, temperature is a particularly important variable there, and we've got the right temperature. So we were interested in saying, look, is there a high value crop like saffron that may actually benefit from some of the nuanced sort of variables that we're dealing with underground? There's also questions of sort of security. So, if we're dealing with cannabis, you've got one in, one out, that potentially could make it easier. Obviously, there's some concerns around cannabis and hemp, lots of opportunities, lots of markets, but, there's still potentially some changes to the rules of the game to really unlock all the potential in that space, particularly on the cannabis side where you're dealing with THC. Other areas, this competition, I think it came up in one of the other questions around sustainable biomass, sustainable biofuel. If we are operating underground, we aren't facing as much of that conflict. Sure, we could be producing food, but it's interesting to think about the baseline and the reference point. I mean, at the moment, the reference point is nothing is produced underground in these kinds of spaces. So, it's an interesting area that we felt if we started, we could start having interesting conversations. We could start getting some of that data to weigh up the different pros and cons and enable us to make these kinds of comparisons. We are very excited about regenerative agriculture. The challenge around that side is the time that it's going to take to get it set up and get it generating revenue. Hydroponics is quick. We're going to be, hopefully in a month's time, we're going to have a plant underground and we're going to be harvesting in May. Whereas regenerative agriculture takes a longer period of time. So again, going to my point about saying we're likely to bundle a few different options together. It's not regenerative agriculture or hydroponics. It's not necessarily underground or surface. It could be a combination of these different things. And there was something else. Owen, have I covered those? There were a few different questions. Is there anything sort of outstanding?
I think you've covered those. I think a lot of it is also, it's exploratory. We're needing to test a lot of these things. In terms of replicability, 51% of coal mines in South Africa are underground. So there's huge amounts of space which hydroponics don't necessarily need, but the potential there is vast. In terms of how we're going to track and monitor the success of this, there was a question just around the methodology that we're using there. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Sorry, can you just repeat that, Owen?
Just the methodology of how we're going to track and monitor the success of this.
Yeah.
I can speak to it. I mean,
yeah, go for it, Owen.
Yeah, I think really what we're trying to do is just test the model. Ultimately, it needs to have a strong enough business case. So firstly, we're looking at the viability, so the technical viability of growing underground, what that looks like, what that means for markets, for demand, and obviously for scale and supply. But then we're looking at the economics of it, and then we'll look at the social impact of it, the potential for job creation, and then the co-ownership. And I think there is a really exciting opportunity. There were questions around who the funders are and that social, the community ownership. The funding came from a local corporate in the area who has put their SED grant funding into this project, and it's community owned. So obviously for this small pilot, it's community owned, and then at scale we'll work on that model. Okay. Lauren?
Yeah, there's another question here from Sandy. Hi, Sandy. Which asks about thinking about the investments that are coming into the just transition and how to basically match the kinds of funds that are flowing into the transition into the particular kinds of opportunities that are being funded. So I think, when we're thinking about sort of really exploratory projects, obviously we're not going to get at this stage where we're really building a model commercial finance. So that's not, I think, an option for us. So we're definitely going to need, moving forward, we've been funded up to now, but we're definitely going to need different kinds of funding, I think, at different sort of points of maturity of the kind of commercial project, right? And so just to reinforce again, our commercial project is going to be an enterprise that has maximized social benefits and progressive ownership structure. So that's contained within our understanding of what will be a commercial project. So yeah, and I think when it comes to, well, how do you ensure that just transition funds are used to pursue just outcomes? So those things that we as a country and at the provincial level have been really prioritized and affirmed as wanted and as priority just transition outcomes. So certainly employment and quality employment, dignified employment, I would say actually as well, is one of those outcomes. How do you ensure accountability in the way that just transition funds are allocated to projects and then connected to outcomes? I mean, I really think that, so of course, on the finance side, there are debates around, taxonomical considerations and all of those things. But really, in the project implementation side of things, we have to think about how we also build systems of accountability, especially when projects are exploratory, right? So especially when projects are not guaranteed to succeed or not guaranteed to succeed in a specific kind of way, you have to have robust, accountable relationships where people who are impacted by that project as the project progresses are able to shape the project and also able to point out failures in the project as well. And if those mechanisms for feedback don't work, then you don't have an accountable project, and then actually it's not a just transition project, because you can't have just outcomes only with means that are not just, that are not sufficiently transparent and participatory and all of those and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot more can be said about that, and a lot more can be said about free money, cheap money, concessional money, and other kinds of finance for the transition at this juncture and in our sort of transition pathway as a country. But that's, for us, certainly we're still thinking about, for the next phase of work, getting grant funding, grant funding, but also there's opportunities for other kinds of funding to come in. I just want to hand over to Anthony on that point as well.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe also to build in a response to one of the questions, or a couple of the questions around the legal side. So I think what we've been able to do is, a little bit of a bootstrap approach to really trying to explore, is there an opportunity to drive this kind of model? I'm not trying to repackage the just transition purely as opportunity, but is there a space for this kind of model to contribute towards the challenge? And I think what we've found is absolutely there is, but we need to take it a level further. And legal is one of those areas. So, based on some initial engagements, we don't see any red flags as such. But it is a highly regulated environment, mining. And so we need to, as part of our next stage before we get to feasibility, we need to contract specialist legal support to really interrogate some of these things in more detail. We can see that we can do it. We can do certain things when it comes to economic diversification. We don't have to necessarily change water use licenses, for example. If we start talking about liabilities, closure, then it starts to shift. So, we have very much focused on economic diversification initially, but we do sort of see, well, is there an opportunity to create a model where, these kind of viable businesses can become off-takers of water, can sustain, the ongoing OpEx costs to deal with water treatment that a lot of mines are getting stuck on when it comes to closure. At least that's one big part of it. So we are starting to also engage with the closure side, but we need to understand the implications around where the liability sits. We don't want to create a situation where we start up a business, we've got a local community that has an ownership stake within this, and then all of a sudden we find that the local community is getting hit with a whole pile of liability. So very much this is an area of importance, but something that we now feel we are in a position to justify, we think, an argument to really explore it in a lot more detail.
Yeah, thanks. Then I just want to address the comments in the chat. There are two comments I want to address. So the first one is around, should South Africa be pushing this transition? So look, this project is thinking about coal mines, which have a lifespan. And at the end of the lifespan, the coal mine closes down. And what happens in South Africa most of the time, at the time when coal mines cease to operate, is that there's some kind of care and maintenance program that's put in place, and we haven't shut them down. So we're not talking about going around trying to build, trying to shut down coal mines early or anything like that. That's not what this project is aiming to do. This project is seeing an inevitable end of life, and then trying to think about one aspect of that repurposing story, right? So coal mines are vast. As Anthony pointed out, I think, when you visit a coal mine and you go underground, you really get a sense of the vastness of this, of these infrastructural feats of these projects. And so this is not all things to all people, all things to all stakeholders. No, it's not a panacea. And so I think that's something very important to bear in mind. And then there was a comment that, it disappeared, but it was about, whether this kind of project gets, because it's also thinking about the underground infrastructure, gets in the way of rehabilitation. So, and we're thinking about, as a mine moves towards closure and beyond, what kinds of initiatives make sense. So we're not saying we have the perfect solution that is going to make sense forever and always. We are learning. This is a learning lab, and so those kinds of assumptions about which business models make sense when. Some mining sites require much more rehabilitation than others. I think one of the lessons that we got that were very practical about this site was that actually there's like relatively good water quality. Water availability is not a significant constraint at the site for us. And so, I think, the point is that it's not, we don't have any foregone conclusions at this stage. And in fact, we invite people to keep adding, to keep pointing to our assumptions as we go, and to think with us about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. We'll learn a lot of lessons, and that will entail getting some things wrong. Some of our ideas will not be correct, and hopefully some will be, and that correctness will be hopefully fruitful and generative, economically generative, but also generating knowledge and insight for across the province and to other locations as well. So we welcome all kinds of engagement, near and far.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe just building on that, and it also speaks to two of the questions around the one around engineering partners and the other around other mining houses. I mean, that's a key objective behind us having this webinar. Is we wanted to open up the potential to have collaborative discussions and explore partnerships. So I mean, we have been working with a range of technology and engineering type providers and solutions, and that's been really useful as part of us exploring the option space. Looking at mining companies, we've been thinking a lot about, is this something that is an offering to mining companies? Is it something we work with mining companies? And I think that for us, we're open and we're trying to explore. I mean, we very much have an idea of scale. So, we're wanting to scale up and scale out. Okay, but so I think I just wanted to highlight that. The other was around very briefly on methane. I mean, it's a specific question, but interestingly, I think this is the highest concentration of methane in the country in terms of underground mines. We're not like Australia that has much higher concentrations of methane. So we did consider it for power, but it's nowhere near as good as, say, solar and other forms of renewables. But it did open up the investigations into offsets. I mean, we are looking at nature-based offsets, but as a shorter-term option, potentially flaring, for example. So an interesting example of, I think, how we're looking at this. All right, so I'm not sure.
I think where we are at the moment is there's 4 minutes left. So I'm sorry, we haven't been able to get to every question, and I think we will endeavor to answer those questions post this in the coming days. And like I said in the chat, there is a Google form there for you to reach out to us, to contact us, and for us to be in touch with you and to take engagement further. So I think if we can, maybe we'll stop then. Lauren, perhaps you can just wrap up for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just want to say a big thank you for sticking with us. It's been a long conversation and a lot of information that we've shared. And I just want to say thank you so much for that robust engagement. And I really hope that this is just the beginning. It certainly for us feels like just the beginning. We're certainly convinced at this point in the project that there is potential here to move forward. I think, you know, when Anthony and I first started engaging around this project, we weren't sure what the potential was. We had a sense of that there was possibility, you know, and we had a sense that we had some insight and skills that we could bring into that space of possibility. And it's been an exploratory process, and we hope that that's come across, you know. We hope that you know, that our spirit of playing open cards and really being sincerely committed to learning and sincerely committed to that learning in the most ethical possible way and towards a very concrete ambition around a commercial venture. We hope that's come across, and we hope that it's got you at least a little bit as excited as we are to keep going. So just to reiterate, we're in our pre-feasibility phase. We have a bit more pre-feasibility work to do. We're currently in the phase of also thinking about how we're going to structure our funding for that next phase of work, and then into the future as well. We are really open to engagement. So our emails are here on screen, but what we also will be doing is to follow up by sharing a recording of this webinar, as well as a written document as well that sort of shares some information in a written format with you. So then we just want to end by saying, I think just a sincere thank you to everybody who has and continues to offer us various kinds of support. And of course, a very special thank you to all our colleagues in Mpumalanga. I mean, really, honestly, the encouragement that we've received from provincial stakeholders, the encouragement that we've received from the Green Cluster, from Natin Konyane, thank you very, very much. I believe that he's not on the call because he has urgent economic diversification business to attend to anymore, but he'll see this. So we thank him in his absence. And then I really do invite you to connect with us. There is so much more work to do. Again, I want to underscore, this project does not exist to the exclusion of any other project. If there is cross-learning to be done, if there is sharing that can be facilitated, if there is engagement that can be facilitated, we are open. So do reach out to us. Thank you very much. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much, everyone. Really do appreciate your time.